To understand deeply how to read and to write music, it's important to understand how mankind reached to musical writing. So, it's important to understand how the musical alphabet was born and conceived. To better understand how we got to the point of musical writing, it's important to compare musical writing to another type of writing, another kind of writing, which is normal verbal writing that we normally use to express our concepts, to write them down and express them. Because just like musical writing is a kind of writing that graphically expresses the musical discourse, so does verbal writing, which was actually invented and coded to represent the speech we use daily to convey informations between one another. So we can see that just like normal common writing is tied to human speech, to the aspect of speech, to the aspect of human speech and the need to represent it with ink on paper, musical writing happens to be the same thing, which develops into a form of musical language. It's important to immediately understand, comparing these two concepts, verbal language and musical language, it's important that to understand how one was born, and by understanding how one was born, we'll understand how the other was born. So at one point in history, mankind faced the problem of graphically representing speech, both verbal and musical speech. When we write it down graphically, we obtain verbal writing. And actually, it's exactly the same thing that happens with what we call musical writing. We use some concepts to represent what we are trying to say. Of course, these are two abstract concepts, but on a practical point of view, being able to represent a language, be it verbal or musical languages, creates a lot of problems to be able to graphically represent it. So we will try to understand the two main problems that we have to solve to be able to successfully depict verbal writing and musical writing. The first problem is the following. How can we represent time graphically and the passing of time? Why do we have to do this? For a very simple reason, because a common property of both verbal speech and musical speech is to evolve in time. If you try to analyze a talk you're having with a friend, you will notice that this happens over a span of time. Or perhaps a lecture or conference held by a scholar could start at 2 p.m. and end at 3 p.m. So it covers the time span of exactly 1 hour. The same thing happens if you play a melody at the piano. This melody will have a certain duration, for example, 30 seconds. So it will evolve in time, through time. So verbal and musical speech are activities that have a time component that cannot be ignored because they evolve in time. So to be able to graphically depict them, we have to be able to somehow represent time graphically, which is an abstract entity. The solution that mankind has found to graphically show time is the following. Time is represented through space. So what does this mean exactly? This naturally is a concept that appears to be very abstract in words, but in reality it's quite simple. If I take, for example, an arrow, as you can see on the screen, it will have its own direction. So, for example, it starts on the left and goes towards the right on your screen. This arrow represents the passing of time. So everything that is on this side of the arrow, we could say, happens before. And everything that is on the right side, as we move to the right side, will happen later. This is something quite intuitive, which we usually don't really think about, because we're used to learning to read as kids in school, without wondering about it, without questioning the act of reading. But if you really think about it, it's quite interesting that when you read a sentence, it's conventionally known that the graphical symbols used in the sentence are read from left to right. This, at least, of course, in the Western language system, in Western civilization, we could say writing happens from left to right. So this is a convention, we could say, that tells us that if we have a sentence on paper or on screen, we know that going from left to right, we will automatically be reading it through time. We could say it will evolve through time. For example, a sentence from a poem, it's actually self-evident that we have to read these graphical symbols from left to right, but we're actually representing time graphically, which means that our sentence is happening, it's actually evolving and happening through time. The same thing of graphical depiction of time happens with musical writing, where we also write from the left to the right. We already know that this note, this graphical symbol corresponding to a sound, will be played before this other one.